Hey everybody, welcome to the Bernina L460 Serger Manual. Today we're going to skip over some pages and go to the chart on page 23. That's the chart that's also included with the sort of the quick reference guide. What I want to do today is show you how to thread your serger for a 4-thread overlock stitch. The reason why I want to do this today is because next week I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you some features and some settings, but I think it's helpful if you know how to thread the serger so you can try it and stitch with me. So that's why I'm skipping over some pages. So we're going to start on page 23, and basically 23 is the stitch guide chart that tells you how to set up your machine. So I'm going to read across the chart. We're going to do the 4-thread overlock. So just to make yourself familiar with it, it starts with the stitch pattern is the first column. Then you have your left needle, your right needle, upper looper, lower looper, rolled hem lever, upper looper converter, cutting width, stitch length, and differential feed. Now these are all suggested starting points. The cutting width, the stitch length, and the differential feed are suggested starting points. You may need to adjust those further depending on your fabric. But to get started, you can see I have the serger in front of me here. And in the back, I've got my thread set on the thread stand, and I'm going to use colors that are the same colors as the color coding or similar. So for the left needle, I'm using ivory instead of yellow because I didn't have any yellow. But then I'm going to use green for my right needle, blue for my upper looper, and red for my lower looper. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start threading the serger. And if I switch to page 24, it gives you the order in which you want to thread your serger. So for this serger, you want to thread starting with the upper looper, so the second one in from the right, okay? And the first step to threading all of these paths is to put the spool on the spool stand, bring it up over this antenna, and then click it into the pre-tension thread guide, which is back here. So they're back here, sort of behind the tension discs. Then when you get past that, you're going to be threading through the tension area, and you want to make sure you can see the red light. Remember, if your presser foot is up, the tension discs are open, and the thread will seat in between those tension discs when you put the presser foot down. So I've got it through the tension, and then we're just going to follow the chart or the colored dots along the way. So the first upper looper guide is right here, okay, in this clip, and then we're going to do these two clips right here, okay, and if you notice, these two clips down here are for the blue and red, so both loopers thread through these two guides. For the upper looper, the next step is it has to go through this wire guide, and basically you can wrap it behind and it will catch through. You don't have to thread it up through, you just wrap it around and it catches in there. And then the last step to threading the looper is to thread the eye of the looper. Now the one thing I didn't mention, or I forgot to mention here, is you want to make sure your hand wheel is turned so that the black line on the window is lining up with the red horizontal line. The upper looper is in the easiest place to thread. Once I get the tail in there, I'm going to grab it by the tweezers and I'm going to pull it straight back. Okay, so I'm not going to pull it towards me. I'm just going to pull it straight back because that's where it needs to go. Okay, so I'm going to tuck it under the presser foot like this. All right, and so now the upper looper is threaded. So again, I'm putting my thread, I'm catching it in the pre-tension guide down through the tension area. I'm going to put it into this guide right here. I'm going to click them into these two guides right here. Now this is where the lower looper takes off and goes in a different direction. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to catch the thread in this guide right here. This guide is right above the lower looper threader lever, which is right here, this white lever. If you push down on that white lever, watch what happens. It swings a hook that basically threads the back of the lower looper for you. I'm just going to take the thread, I'm just going to use my tweezers and I'm going to stick it into that hook right there. Okay, you can see that. Now, if I turn the hand wheel towards me, it's going to reset that lever. Watch. Do you hear it click? Okay, so now that lever is back into position, and the next step is I am going to thread my lower looper. Okay, so I am going to actually turn my hand wheel towards me until the lower looper is crisscross with the upper looper. And I realize this is not a step in the instruction manual. Okay, I realize this is not a step in the instruction manual, but if you crisscross the upper and lower looper, puts the lower looper in the exact position it needs to be to thread that thread over the upper looper. Okay, so now you can see my lower looper thread is laying on top of my upper looper thread, and my upper looper thread is going directly behind and under the presser foot. Okay, so that is completed the threading of the loopers. Good news, the needles are easier, so let me show you how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to start with the right needle. That's the next step indicated in the threading order on page 24. I'm going to stick the thread into the pre-tension thread guide, down through this hook here, and then I'm going to go up and around this lower guide where the green dot is, and then I'm going to stick the thread into this right guide here and the right guide here. All right, and then before I thread the needles, I'm going to get the last thread going. So I'm going to take it through the tension, pre-tension, down, around the metal, and up over this higher thread guide. And I'm going to put it in the left guide and in the left guide here. And I just want to show you guys, this is really nice that this serger has these guides. Both of the needle threads are separate, and there are separate guides above the needle bar and then right here as well. And that just helps to really keep your threads separated so they don't get twisted when you're serging. I think that's really a nice threading detail here. Now, the other thing you'll notice, I only have one needle in my needle bar because I was doing some 3-thread stitching before I came on today. So what I'm going to do now, everything is threaded through the tension, so I'm going to put the presser foot down, okay? And that's going to give me just a little bit more room to work with these needles, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my other needle and I'm going to insert it back into the left needle space. And to do that, I'm going to show you how to use this needle inserter. This is a really cool tool because what you can do is you can stick your needle into this end of it so that the flat side is facing backward. And then I can just use it to insert my needle right into the space where it needs to go. Okay, and it's really cool. I don't have to have my fingers in the way there. I can just hold it off to the side like this, and then making sure it's pushed up all the way, I can see that the top of the needle is inserted all the way. So I'm just going to tighten the upper screw because that's the one that tightens the left needle. Okay, so that's how you use the needle inserter. And then while I've got that out, I'm going to also show you how to use the needle threader. So just for your reference, I guess I'm gonna go back a few pages. Let me tell you what page that's on. There are good detailed instructions on how to use this needle threader, and they are on page 16. Okay, so I'm gonna put the thread through the horizontal slits like this. Then I'm gonna bring it over to my needle and I'm gonna line it up with the hole in the needle, and I'm gonna press down. And when I press down and remove the threader, what happens is there's a little wire in there that pushes the thread through the eye of the needle. And I think you can see that the thread has gone through. Then see this little L-shaped hook? You just use that to grab the little loop you made, and that's how you use the needle threader. It's kind of a cool thing. I will tell you though, it is a very delicate thing, so make sure you're gentle with it and make sure you're lined up with the eye of the needle before you push down. So let me show you again. You're going to put it in like this, rotate it so it's lined up with the hole, and then you're just going to push and let go. And again, if I reach around with that little hook, it pulls the thread through for me. So that's a neat little doodad. So the instructions for this are on page 16. So check that out. I'm going to put it back so it doesn't get lost. Okay, so I've got my machine threaded now. All right, so I'm going to shut my door and I'm going to lift my presser foot and I'm going to put all of the threads underneath the presser foot like this. So here are my threads. They're ready to go. I'm going to gently pull them for a hot second just to make sure everything is spooling off from the thread spools over the antenna, through all the tension area. Everything is nice and neat. Now, another tip, once you get going with your serger, once you realize how many things you can do with this serger, one tip is make sure you go back and check and make sure you're starting with your tension settings all at neutral or number 4. So those are the settings you want to start with when you're doing a basic 4-thread overlock stitch. So I've got all of my tension set at 4. I'm going to push my blade all the way out. Well, I'll do 7. Okay, and remember the guide for that is up here. There's little numbers here. So see right there. And then my stitch length is going to be 2.5. That's a standard stitch length to start with. And my differential feed is on 1. So those are the settings for a basic 4-thread overlock stitch when you're working with stable woven fabric. So let's try it and see. So I've cut myself some muslin here, and I'm just going to put the fabric all the way under the presser foot to get started, like this. I'm going to put my presser foot down, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to serge along here. You always want to start slowly. Okay, I'm going to chain off. Let's take a close look at this stitch so I can show you where all of the threads are coming from, because remember they're all different colors, and then I can show you what it looks like when it's stitching out properly. All right, so you can see this, almost everything you see here is the blue thread. That's your upper looper thread, and that's why they call it the upper looper, because it shows on the top side of the fabric when you stitch. The other thing you can see from this top side is the green thread is running through the loopers like this. That is the right needle, and then the ivory thread is at the base of the stitch. That is the left needle, and you should see those 2 parallel lines running on the top. On the bottom side of the stitch, notice what we see here is mostly red. That is the lower looper thread, and you can see that they kind of create little Ys. There's a little short straight stitch that's caught between the left and right needle, and then it opens up into a Y shape when it connects with the upper looper thread. So what you should be seeing on a perfectly balanced 4-thread overlock stitch is a row of stitching along the base. Now on the underside, it's not the left needle, it's the lower looper, and we can tell that because it's red in color. Okay, and then the other thing you can see is little green dots where the left needle is catching the lower looper thread. Okay, and then from the cut edge of the fabric, you should see the upper and lower looper threads connecting, kind of like this. Okay, and where they connect should be right on that cut edge. Okay, and if I'm being fussy, like really fussy, if we look really closely, you can see here that the upper looper thread is curling around slightly to the underside of the stitch. So what's happening here is either the upper looper is a little bit too loose and there's some play in it and it's causing it to be loose up here and it's coming over to the underside, or it could also be that the lower looper thread is a little bit too tight and it's pulling it around. Now, from looking at this in person, my red threads seem really tight to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my serger and I am just going to loosen the lower looper tension, not to 3. You can do a lot of adjusting on your tension dials. And my recommendation is to make very small changes to see if it helps. So I'm just going to bring my tension disc so it's a little bit before 4. So it's not 3 and it's not even 3.5. It's probably like 3 3/4. And we're going to stitch it again and see if it looks better. All right, so I'm just going to run it on the opposite side of this fabric because I want to see if loosening my red lower looper makes it stitch a little bit nicer. All right, let's take a close look at this. All right, so let's look at the second row of stitching that I did. They almost look the same from the top edge, but I can see the red thread at the actual edge. Let's turn it and look here. All right, let's look really closely. You can see on my first row of serging, you can see the blue pulling to the underside. Notice you can't see that now, okay? This is a perfectly balanced stitch. The stitches are forming right on the cut edge. So to fix this problem with these upper looper threads coming to the underside, all I did was loosen the lower looper so it didn't pull so hard on the upper looper thread. And you can see that that is a perfectly balanced stitch. That's how you thread your Baby Lock L460 or L450 for a 4-thread overlock stitch. And you can see you can make fine adjustments to it to get the perfectly balanced stitch. Next week, I'm going to show you the difference between your cutting width and your seam allowance, because those two terms can be confusing when you're just starting out using your serger. So we're going to deal with those topics as well as some more fine-tune adjusting for tension issues next week. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. And I will see you next Sunday with another episode of the Baby Lock L460 Serger Manual.